Good evening, everybody. I'm Bill Barnes, president of Potrero Hill Democratic Club. I want to thank everybody for being here, club members, as well as neighbors with a variety of organizations. First, wanted to also acknowledge our executive board of the Democratic Club, our vice president, Joni Eisen, our secretary, Patrick Doyle, our tech officer, John O'Neill, and J.R. Epler, who serves on the board at large. And just want to acknowledge their volunteer service and participation. If you're a club member, you've received an email with a ballot. Please return that ballot by email before the meeting is over or by 8:30. And we have a bylaws amendment as well as an endorsement vote in that ballot. The other quick announcement is that we are accepting nominations for officers. We accept those nominations at this meeting, but we vote on officers in the February meeting. So if you are a club member and you want to run for any of the positions on the board, please let us know. And you can do that by direct messaging Joni or me or JR, and we'll make sure that your nomination is included for the February meeting. So with that, and in the interest of time, let me introduce our moderator, Joe Eskenazi, who I've known for a long time, first at the J Weekly, and then at SF Weekly, and then at the San Francisco Magazine, and now at Mission Local, but just somebody who's been an independent voice in journalism in our community. And the Mission, being somewhat adjacent to our neighborhoods of Potrero Hill and Dogpatch, has a lot of similar concerns. Joe's familiar with state politics, local politics, and also our neighborhood issues, and he will be moderating the remainder of this forum. So let me turn it over to Joe Eskenazi.
Well, thank you kindly, Bill. I really appreciate it. And thank you to the Potrero Hill Dems for inviting me. And thank you to all the sponsoring organizations, which are, of course, the Potrero Hill Democratic Club, the Potrero Boosters Neighborhood Association, the Dogpatch Neighborhood Association, and the Potrero Dogpatch Merchants Association. And thanks to the candidates and all of you for coming on a Tuesday night. Here is the format. The candidates know this, but I should tell you all as well. They are going to have 3-minute intros. And then I will ask them questions, which they have 90 seconds to answer. And there is a possibility of a 30-second rebuttal. There will be a lightning round where they have to answer yes or no to dogged questions. And they have 2-minute wrap-ups. You guys, the audience, get to send messages to the executive staff and myself with potential questions. Consider this the electronic equivalent of writing on a cue card and handing it up. And we will take, I think, at least 3 or 4 of them, and possibly more. If depending on as time allows. Tonight we have 3 candidates present at the moment. We have Bilal Mahmoud, we have Thea Selby, we have David Campos, and if the Board of Supervisors meeting ends in a timely fashion, we can get Matt Haney for some or all of the presentation, and he knows he can drop in late, and he extends his apologies that he can't be here to the candidates and the audience. So with that, I think we should get started with our introductions and the candidates. You have 3 minutes to introduce yourself. And why don't we start with Thea Selby.
Thank you, Joe Eskenazi. Let me set my own timer. I'm not sure I can see the one over there.
If you scroll on the top, you can probably see it. Just keep scrolling to all our faces until you get to the big blue screen.
I see blue sky timer and it's black.
Oh, well,
okay.
I guess I haven't started yet.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyhow, first of all, thank you. Thank you all for doing this. As usual, the Potrero Hill Democratic Club, I want to thank you very much. I want to thank Joe Eskenazi, who is also my textazine. I am one of his subscribers, which you too can be. A little plug. For only $4 a month, you can get the scoop from Joe Eskenazi. So a little bit, I'm honored to be here today, hopefully as your candidate for District 17, and I'd be honored with your endorsement. I am a mom. I have 2 kids. I've raised them in the district, and I want to be a champion for working families in San Francisco. Unfortunately, it's really hard to raise a family here in San Francisco, and I think it'll be really good to have somebody who has that real life experience of doing that. I'm also a small business owner. I know there are a lot of small business owners here. I believe that small businesses are what make our neighborhoods special. special. There's so many of them here in San Francisco, and I've been one for 20 years. I want to make sure that we have a champion for small business as we recover from COVID. The next thing is I want to make sure that all of our neighborhoods are safe for everyone. Public safety is personal for me. I started the Lower Haight Merchant and Neighbor Association in 2007 after there was a double murder on my block. And I believe all of us, whether we're homeless, whether we're experiencing homelessness, whether we are moms with strollers, whoever we might be, Asian people on the bus, seniors, we should all be safe in our city. And finally, for the past 7 years, I have been a citywide elected city college trustee, and I have been tempered at City College. I came in as the Accreditation Commission was working to destroy it. We turned it around. We now have a balanced budget, and we have a permanent chancellor with a CPA who is going to get us to fiscally thriving. So why am I doing this? Well, first of all, thank you. I do see that. I believe that education is the ladder of opportunity, and the assembly is where you have the opportunity on budgets and on accountability for education. So with my background in public education, I want to make sure I'm there to help it. Secondly, my children are very worried about climate change. They're worried their lives are going to be shortened, and they really think that we are frittering away our opportunities to meet or exceed climate goals. I will be a champion through working in housing, and also I am a transit advocate and expert to make sure that we meet or exceed those climate goals. Thank you very much. I would be honored with your endorsement.
Well, thank you kindly. I don't see the timer, so I will ask the tech wizards to get working on that one. I will keep my eye on the clock. And the next, let's go to Bilal.
Thanks, Joe. And hello, everyone. And thank you so much for having me. For those who don't know me, my name is Bilal Mahmoud. I'm a neuroscientist, a civil servant, and an entrepreneur. And I'm running for state assembly because I want to return San Francisco to what it represented for my family, which was a beacon of hope. A beacon of hope for the middle class, for immigrants, for women, for LGBTQ+, for migrants, anyone searching for a better life in our city. And this is personal for me because I am the child of immigrants. My parents came to the Bay 30+ years ago, leaving a dictatorship behind in search of their better life. And we grew up with 3 generations in a single bedroom apartment. My mom was eventually able to become a librarian and took public transit every day just so we could get into the best public schools. And my family was eventually able to achieve that American dream. And it was because of housing and schools and transit and safety, the facets of the middle class that the Bay Area provided to my family growing up. And that's what our campaign is about, is how do we ensure that those facets remain in the decade ahead? And to ensure that dream, I think we honestly need new ideas and new leadership. I've worked as a scientist at Stanford Medical School, an analyst in the Obama administration, where we eventually worked to pass the Jobs Act, and an entrepreneur in the nonprofit and private sectors. I'm most proud of the innovative programs our foundation did in nonprofits, which was setting up guaranteed income for workers who were struggling during the pandemic, or helping small businesses with microlending programs so they could get off the ground and actually succeed in this economy. And it's this mix of science and technology and philanthropy that I think is necessary to address the challenges ahead, because exponentially worsening inequality and climate change are coming. And that we have to ensure that we get things like a Green New Deal, universal healthcare, affordable housing. And because of the threat of climate, we only have years left to act. There's no longer time to rely on politics as usual. It will take courage and new ideas and new leadership to get us there. And the necessity for these new ideas is critical because according to the IPCC, we only have 5 to 8 years left. And our campaign is advocating for bold new ideas to address each of these different components, which I'm excited to share with you today, aside from built for zero systems that have actually solved chronic homelessness in 14 US cities, to actual climate policies developed by the authors of the original Green New Deal to address California's unique challenges. And we have the experience from national policy to public to private sectors to actually deliver on those ideas and those theories. That is how we will return San Francisco as a beacon of hope for the middle class, for anyone searching for a better life. And I look forward to sharing that vision with you today and in the hour to come. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And David Campos. David, are you muted?
Sorry, wasn't letting me unmute. My apologies there. Thank you very much to the Potrero Hill Democratic Club for hosting this. I also want to thank the Potrero Hill Boosters, quite an appropriate name, I think, given the times, and the Potrero Hill Dogpatch Neighborhood Association and Merchants Association as well. And of course, to Joe Eskenazi, who has been an independent voice for so many years. I'm proud to be on the same forum with you, Joe.
Thank you, Kyle.
This is a very important debate because if you look at the history of the Potrero Hill Democratic Club and Potrero Hill as a neighborhood, this is a neighborhood that has gotten many things right. And I do think that this neighborhood could very well decide who represents the 17th Assembly District. I see my good friend, Mayor Art Agnos here. And I want to share with you today my vision for how I would represent this district in the state of California. My vision for the state of California. And what I envision is a state here in California that is no longer just talking about ending poverty, but actually ends poverty. And we start by having a true living wage. I envision a state of California where homelessness is no longer left to the individual generosity of cities or counties, but it's actually seen as a tragedy, as a humanitarian challenge that requires statewide action and intervention. I envision a state of California where we don't abandon neighborhoods, we don't abandon communities, a state, quite frankly, where the tragedy that has been unfolding in the Tenderloin would be unthinkable. A state of California where Black and brown people are not asked to be on the front lines of something like a pandemic and then are left to die in disproportionate numbers as a result of it. I envision a state of California where everyone has affordable healthcare, access to mental health, where we can have drug and alcohol treatment when people need it. A state of California that creates jobs for the middle class, and where we don't confuse luxury housing with affordable housing. And quite frankly, a state of California where we, the people, not the corporations, elect a leader. A state where the leadership of the government looks like us and fights for us, regular people. That's my vision, and I hope you join me at compostforus.com in that vision. There's a very important choice that you have before you, and it's a choice that talks about where we are going as a city, where we are going as a state. My vision is for a state of California that lives everyone, that brings everyone along, including those that have been left behind. Thank you very much, and I look forward to taking your questions.
Well, thank you kindly. And also, in lieu of the electronic timer, we've gone to our analog J.R. Epler. Candidates can watch him in the corner there. I'm impressed you had the props, J.R. He has his signs there telling us how much time is left. And thank you to everyone for staying on time. So now on to the questions. The New York Times has put a microphone in front of our former Assemblyman Willie Brown, and he is none too impressed with San Francisco's local and regional leaders. Mr. Brown and local constituent John Burton long controlled the levers of power in Sacramento, so San Francisco made up pretty well. How does it work now, in your views? How will you help ensure San Francisco has the requisite amount of power and influence and makes out pretty well? And let's start with Selby.
Thank you, Joe. Yeah, I've had the honor actually of meeting both with John Burton and Willie Brown as a result of running for the Assembly, which I have to say I have really enjoyed. So first of all, I think the first question is, of course, there are term limits, which Willie Brown had 30 years, which is one of the reasons we have term limits, is because there was an understanding that perhaps what we do want is, in some cases, some turnover. Okay, very short. Okay, so two things that come to my mind. First is that I think our Assembly member, in particular, David Chu, I'm thinking about AB 1482, which was pretty groundbreaking. He's done some great legislation having to do with eviction and making sure that our housing gets built. He also did Baja, the Bay Area, housing authority. These are two things that are going to move forward. You need two things, land and money for housing. So from that standpoint, I think we are doing pretty well. Scott Wiener, you may love him or hate him, but he has authored, you know, housing that will, it's very important that we have our checks and balances and that we have the state being able to actually hopefully make our housing mandate more than just an aspiration, but a reality. And I think some of the work he's done there is good. So sorry, Willie, you know, we all can't be there for 30 years, but hopefully the next leader, the next set of leaders will also lead well. Thank you.
Is that ringing? Okay. I thought it might be something on my wife's computer. All right, fair enough. Thank you. The question again is, now that we are out of the Pleistocene in the Assembly, how does it work now? And how do you ensure that San Francisco has the requisite amount of power and influence as it always has? Bilal Mahmood.
Yeah, so I think the second part of the question is clearly important in this election because we have a national crisis going on with the conversation around progressivism. San Francisco is the beacon for progressivism. We are the standard bearer and we have the onus of responsibility to prove that it works. If we look at what's happening nationally, there is risk of the House turning back to Republicans because of how people are using San Francisco as a punching bag. We look at the Tenderloin, they believe our values don't work, and that's not the concern. The issue is that we don't have leadership that can deliver on the values that we hold dear. And so I think how we maintain power and that responsibility and the purpose that San Francisco brings to the state is we have effective progressivism. We have leaders who can deliver on those outcomes-driven legislation. Some of the legislation, such as leaders like Scott Wiener and David Chu, push things that actually got things done, from housing to state to transit to anti-Asian violence legislation. So these are the things that we need to actually prove. We need to prove that we can deliver on these outcomes and have outcomes-driven legislation. If we don't, we're going to have a further reaction to the right nationally. And that's how you maintain the authority and the mandate that San Francisco has, is delivering on the outcomes. And unfortunately, I feel that a lot of the leadership in our city has not delivered on those outcomes. If you look at anti-Asian violence rising, homelessness rising, opioid epidemic rising, that is the concern we have today. And we have to turn that image around through actual legislation that fixes the problems.
All right. And David Campos, how do things work in Sacramento, and how will you ensure San Francisco is properly represented?
Thank you very much for that question, and I'm glad that you mentioned Willie Brown and John Burton, because whatever you think about them specifically, they have been institutions for quite some time. And quite frankly, with Willie Brown, I haven't agreed with Willie Brown on many issues, and we've been on the opposite side of many issues. But I think that the reason why Willie Brown has actually taken the step of endorsing me in this race, as has John Burton, is not that they agree with me, but because they see in me someone who can actually get things done and who can actually make things happen. And I will say this, that one of the first prerequisites of actually being effective in Sacramento is actually wanting to be in Sacramento. I am running to be an assembly member. I am running to be in Sacramento as long as my constituents will have me. I am not running because I'm looking for the next big thing that I'm going to run for. The job of being a legislator is serious work. And I think the reason why, even though I'm not on the Board of Supervisors and a majority of the Board of Supervisors are supporting me, is because they have seen me get results. I'm the person who made universal healthcare happen when there was a loophole. I'm the person who made free muni for youth happen. I'm the person who made clean power itself, 100% renewable energy, happen against PG&E's opposition. That's why I'm running. And I think that's why people like Willie Brown, like John Burton, are supporting me, because they want someone who's going to be effective at representing the interests of the city in Sacramento.
Fair enough. And I'm assuming Matt Haney isn't here yet. I hope he will get here soon.
Do we get a rebuttal to this one, or when do the rebuttals happen? Is that later?
You could have a rebuttal if you want.
It's not really a rebuttal, but it's in addition. I think that's something I've learned. I worked a lot on high-speed rail over the last, in the spring of this year, to try and get the Assembly to appropriate the money, $4.2 billion that we voted on as a people in 2008 to go to high-speed rail. And one thing I found is that Northern California is not, they're not a united force. So one of the things that I would like to do, and that I think I do well, is collaborate with other Northern California Assembly members to get the power that exists in Southern California quite well, as I've seen. Thank you.
Fair enough. So Ms. Selby got to a bit of this before, but I will be asking you, barring unforeseen lunacy, one of you 4 candidates, and Matt hopefully will be here soon, will fill out the term of David Chu. I'd like you all to assess Assemblyman Chu's term in Sacramento. What did he do well and what was not so good? What would you continue to do and what would you do differently? And let's start this time with Mr. Campos.
Thank you very much, Joe. And as people know, I ran against David Chu and we had a very close race. And I give credit to Assemblymember Chu for the work he has done. And I think that he has been an effective legislator. And one of the things that I've always appreciated about him is that he is a workhorse, and I'm a workhorse as well. And I think that on the issue of housing as an example, I think that he was able to move the needle forward, and I give him a lot of credit for what he did. In terms of what I bring to the table and that I would do differently, we each have our own style. But I think that one perspective that I bring, and it goes, is something that Thea Selby mentioned, which is that, one of the roles that I play is that I'm the vice chair of the California Democratic Party. And through that role, I've been able to develop relationships with people from all over the state, many of whom have endorsed my candidacy for Assembly. And I think that having those sets of relationships is really important. And it's something that I think will be unique to what I bring to the table. The fact that I can work with people like Tony Atkins, who has endorsed me in this campaign, that I have the support of the largest caucus in the state legislature, the Latino caucus, the LGBTQ caucus. I think having that breadth of relationships will be an important piece of being more effective for the interests of San Francisco. So kudos to David Chu. I'll bring my own style and look forward to that opportunity.
Let me use a little moderator's prerogative and just ask, was there anything he did that you didn't agree with? Was there anything that you would, go a different direction?
Well, I don't know that I would have, that I disagree with him, but I think that one thing that I think is missing in Sacramento is the focus on finding resources to build more affordable housing. There's been a lot of conversations about how we need to build more housing, and we have seen a lot of laws, SB 9, SB 10, which I support, to expedite housing. But what's missing in that is identifying sources of funding for affordable housing, because affordable housing will not be built by the market. The state, the government has to intervene. I did that in Santa Clara County for the last 4 years. And I think that that's the perspective that is missing in Sacramento, and that's something that I will bring.
Same question, Bilal Mahmood. Your assessment of David Chu and what you would do differently and what you would continue.
Yeah, I mean, David Chu is an amazing Assembly member, and I think for a couple of reasons. One, he's able to bridge broad coalitions of individuals across San Francisco and bridge that consensus across progressive and moderate to ensure that we have a consistent voice and representation in the city. And if you look at my own actual coalition of individuals as volunteers, it resembles a lot of that coalition as well. But the most thing I valued most about Assemblymember Chu was he pushed for ideas and legislation that wasn't popular, and he repeatedly pushed for it despite being so difficult. Climate legislation with wind farms, offshore wind farms, he pushed for several years until it finally passed. AB 550 for automated speed enforcement, he pushed for several years. It still hasn't passed, but he kept pushing at it. Other facets of the anti-Asian hate crime hotline still didn't pass, but every year he brings it back until he resigned. I think that's the quality we need in our Assembly members and our state legislatures, people who will act from conviction and passion and principles, not based on what they think the the special interests want, or like the largest donors want. They're going to go after what's right for our values and for our government and for the needs of our people. And that's what I will hopefully carry forward. In terms of what I'll do differently, not so much different, but more what I will prioritize and focus. I will focus a lot more in driving forward on legislation on climate change. And actually trying to solve that with a universal Green New Deal to be developed, make that the priority of my focus will be one difference in general.
And there were no moves he did that didn't appeal to you, or something that you wouldn't have taken up, or something you would go in a completely different direction altogether?
No, not in a different direction, just more so priority of focus of where we're seeing the legislation.
And Thea Selby, you got to this a bit in your prior answer, but your assessment of David Chu as an assemblyman and things you'd have done differently and things you will do along similar routes.
Yeah, so I think, thank you. I mentioned two of the pieces of legislation that I thought were outstanding, and they were absolutely around housing, which of course he was, I believe he was the head of the committee in the assembly, so that certainly helps matters, and that is why you want to stick around. I too have a long-term goal of being in the assembly until the voters vote me out, hopefully for the entire time. What I would do, there are two things I liked. There's a thing I like about David Chu that I would continue, and that is that he was really good about bringing together different advocacy groups. So for example, I was part of the women's advocacy group, and he would bring that group together once a year, and he would ask them what legislation they would want to see. And to me, that's the right way to do it. You go to the advocacy groups, to the organizations, to the people who are deep in it, and you ask them, because you can't be everything, right? You ask them, what is really the most important thing? So that I want to stress in terms of legislation. And there was something, I'm just going to be perfectly blunt, that I did not like that David Chu did, and that is that I've been working for over 2 years now with a coalition of 95,000 labor. It's made up of labor and transit and youth and all sorts of other environmental groups called Voices for Public Transportation, and we are interested in a progressive regional transportation measure. And David was backing in 2020, prior to the pandemic, he was backing Faster, which was an alternative that had a regressive model for the transportation, and it was mostly backed by large corporations. So I would say that's one thing where he and I differed, and we had many discussions about it.
Okay. Well, moving to the next question here. And I will push back if I feel that there's more to the answer that you could provide. And we have time, and that's one of the, until Matt Haney gets here, we have a little bit more time even than we counted on. Question number 3 is that everybody loves kids. Everybody loves kids' hospitals. Not everybody loves living next to one. State institutions like UC San Francisco and Hastings do not adhere to local land use rules or pay the same taxes as local institutions. Is the present scenario acceptable? And if not, what would you do at the state level? And let's start with Bilal Mahmood.
Yeah, so just to repeat, the question is, are the local land use for hospitals acceptable policies currently?
Not just hospitals, but a state institution like UC San Francisco or UC Hastings or any other state institution that does not have to adhere to local land use rules or pay the same taxes as a locally based entity.
Got it. I think generally, like, my belief on local control versus state control is that I think the larger problem is more so that cities and counties have too much control, and they are blocking housing development. I think that is the most.
And we will get to that, but let's focus on UC San Francisco and Hastings and state entities like that.
Yeah, I think in that context, I think they provide a valuable service, and they need to be providing the service, and I wouldn't want them to get hindered by local control to deliver on the hospital the needs and the needs of the children, like kids' hospitals, as well as the needs of the individuals. And I think they should get a pass to actually develop the things they need to do in the urgency that we need to do it, and not be hindered by local control to deliver on those outcomes that they need to do for our city.
Right. And if there's a difference between how a county hospital and a state hospital would be overseen by a local entity, that strikes me. There's no remedy there.
I don't think there should be a difference. I think if it's a hospital, it needs to be built. It needs to be built.
All right. David Campos?
Well, with all due respect to Mr. Mahmood, I do have a different perspective on that. Look, I'm certainly not for local governments getting in the way of building housing. But I think the idea that we simply give state institutions carte blanche to do whatever they want is problematic to me. I do think that there has to be more accountability of institutions like UCSF and some of these other state agencies that, quite frankly, at times play by their own rules and often don't take into account what's in the best interest, not just of an adjacent community, but the city as a whole. So I certainly, as an elected representative of San Francisco, will make sure that the voices of communities like Potrero Hill are taken into account by these institutions. I don't think that there is anything obtrusive, obstructive about holding them accountable and making sure that they're doing certain things right, that they play by the same rules, that they're treating their workers, by the way, fairly, that they give them a fair wage, that they take into account concerns around public safety, around transportation. I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. I think that there are times when there is hypocrisy in how the state operates, requiring local jurisdictions to do certain things when their own agencies don't do the right thing. So I think the job of the state representative for San Francisco will be to protect the interests of San Francisco, including neighborhoods like Potrero Hill.
Anthea Selby.
Can I do a rebuttal or just have to be at the end?
Let's wait till the end.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that question. And I'm most familiar with UCSF actually in District 5 because I ran for District 5 in 2012. And the neighbors there really did feel that they did not have a voice. And they worked really, really hard to try and get UCSF at the time that was interested in building. So I guess I take a middling view on that. I think it's a balancing act. I think it's really important. I know people on the SFMC, no names mentioned, who say, why do we have to have public comment at all? And I take a middling view. I really feel like public comment is absolutely critical. I feel like we are here for the people. We are here for the people of San Francisco. And that means the institutions, particularly the public institutions, are also here for the public, for the people. And so they absolutely should be listened to. At the same time, UCSF does provide a really important service. And I'm thinking more now of Mission Day, where I think that they have added to the neighborhood. I believe they've been good neighbors, and that's the bottom line. Everybody, whatever institution they are, whether they are, and I remember Sutter when it was moving in over to Van Ness, how there were all of these issues about everything from wages to whether or not they would be having all driving cars or being on the bus. You need to be a good neighbor, and to do that, you sort of have to go beyond sometimes whether you are state or whether you are county or whether you are city. That's what bottom line to me.
Thank you kindly on that one. And I believe that Mr. Mahmood wanted a rebuttal of sorts of 30 seconds.
Yeah, I think there's two things to add into consideration here, which is when we're funding things like UCSF, these hospitals, they need to cater to the needs as a responsibility as an assembly member to not just the local control, but also to the city and the state and the county. UCSF serves the needs of a broader community, and that has to be taken into account. But also we have to recognize we're in a crisis. We're in a pandemic. We do not have enough beds. We cannot be in a position again where we do not have enough beds to take care of those people who are sick. We have a homelessness crisis. We have an opioid crisis. We need to be building these hospitals in a faster manner so that we have the beds and the shelter and the care necessary to treat them. And that's why this type of issue is super important.
If I can do a rebuttal on that.
I don't think we have rebuttals for rebuttals, David. If it's something we're still thinking about at the end, we can bring it up at the end.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'll let you start on the next one, though, which is it's not the fault of J.R. Epler, who hasn't yet had the chance to fix this institution in his brief tenure on the Building Inspection Commission, but San Francisco's Department of Building Inspection is legendary for both its scleroticism and its corruption. It is the state that oversees the building codes. Should the state take a greater role in overseeing San Francisco's building department? David Campos.
Thank you for that question, Joe. And I definitely believe that the state should play a larger role. And this is something, by the way, that I have been battling as a supervisor who worked very hard to have more transparency and accountability with respect to this agency, the Building Inspection Commission. I think that the status quo is not working. And quite frankly, the status quo hasn't been working for a long time. And I think that even, good people, good mayors who have tried to do their best have had challenges with that. So I think this is one area where I think, in fact, state oversight would be welcome. But quite frankly, I am a good government advocate, and one of the things that that I'm very proud of is that as a supervisor, I held agencies to account. And I think that perspective is an important perspective. And it's not just a perspective that I had as a supervisor, the experience, but the fact that I was actually in Sacramento for 4 years in Santa Clara, running 10 different agencies. That's, I think, a very unique set of experiences that is badly needed in Sacramento. Someone who actually has run agencies, has had to serve people, and who can hold those agencies at the state level accountable. That's what I bring. And I think that's why there is such a wide array of people from all sides of the political spectrum supporting my candidacy, because they know that that experience is badly needed in Sacramento today.
Yes, Elby, your position on this.
Man, this is a toughie. And the reason it's a toughie is because I look at the EDD and I look at how brilliantly the state has overseen the EDD. And I mean, we're talking, what, $38 billion of fraud there. I guess I didn't know that the state oversees DBI. Is that what you said?
No, I'm saying, should the state take a greater role should the state take a greater role? Should there be state oversight of this local?
Well, yeah, and like I say,
department?
that makes it that takes it even further away from where we may be able to fix it. I mean, I would say let's have the state really focus on EDD. Let's have the state figure out how to get, for example, various kinds of signatures that don't have to be wet, for example. There's so many things at the state level that I think need to be fixed. I think the city should be doing that, and I think they should have been doing that a long time ago. And I think they should be doing it now. So I guess that's my thought on that. I don't know that the state needs to step in unless this is a statewide problem, which it very well could be, that DBIs across California are ripe with corruption, and I love the word sclerotic. It makes me almost have a heart attack thinking about it. But yeah, I mean, if that is the case everywhere, then maybe it is a state issue. I'd be happy to look into that. But at the moment, when I look at the state and how they're able to run their various agencies, I don't think that the best thing to do is to get the state involved. I think the city, I think journalists should be involved, and I think the people should insist that we need to get this damn thing fixed.
Fair enough. Journalists, I am told, are involved. Bilal, your position?
Yeah, we have, again, a crisis here around building codes and permits. If you look at the correlation between, broader conversation is, if you compare the differences between cities like Seattle versus San Francisco, or even cities in the East Bay versus San Francisco, one of the biggest correlated differences is the number of permits and building codes required. And San Francisco has some of the highest. And it's clear that leads to higher cost of development, longer times to development, higher cost of maintenance, higher cost of then eventual rent. And so we're not saying the state has to run these institutions. We're saying the state needs oversight and legislation to ensure that we are not becoming a bloated system that makes it impossible to do anything. And so I do think the state needs more oversight. What the mechanics or specifics of that, we can get into details in a research session, but the state needs more oversight to hold these systems accountable and to ensure that we build things on time in a faster mentality and able to get the housing that we need. Because if we don't get the housing that we need, we're not going to be able to keep people here, and we're not going to be able to build the things or the infrastructure, any of these things that are required. And those are the types of things that we need to do. When cities and counties keep being obstructionist and don't allow these things to happen, that's when the state needs to come into control.
Fair enough.
If I may add a rebuttal.
You may, 30 seconds, but it's about this one, David.
Yes, no, and this is where, I appreciate the work you've done around the Department of Building Inspection, Joe, but I think that more oversight is needed. And this is where I think experience matters. When I was on the Board of Supervisors, we're the ones who audited the housing authority that led to the resignation of the head of that agency because of mismanagement. Likewise, as an attorney, we investigated corruption in the San Francisco Unified School District. I think that bringing that experience is really important, and I think it's something that is missing. We're not talking about the state running this agency, simply stepping in and having the oversight that is badly needed.
Fair enough. And a reminder to everyone out there watching, you can also participate. You should send us your questions. I've got a fair amount left here, but it's not just for me. So please send your questions to the to myself, to the hosts, and we can ask your questions to the candidates. My next question is, let's see, what meaningful environmental legislation would you advocate for the Assembly? And you know, I don't want to do any cheap populism. I'm not talking about paper straws, though I think that was a good move, but I'm talking about meaningful environmental legislation. And Ms. Selby, you mentioned this in your introduction, so why don't we start with you?
Thank you. Yeah, I've been working on it, and I am very excited about going to the Assembly and hopefully authoring. There needs to be authorizing legislation for this, what I hope will be $100 billion progressively funded. Probably we're looking at income tax as one of the things. Another possibility is wealth tax, which, you know, we have both very high income and very high wealth in the city. So it certainly will be progressively funded. And the idea behind it is, honestly, we have got to shift the way that we move around this city. 47% of our carbon emissions in San Francisco come from transportation. So public transportation is certainly a big part of it. Mentally changing how we think about the possibility of moving around requires us to have abundant, affordable, and accessible public transportation. You cannot go to the Bayview and get on the T and an hour and a half later get to where you're going in the Lower Haight. That just isn't going to work. We need abundant, accessible, affordable public transportation. In addition, we need hydrogen cell trucks. Trucks are a large part of our carbon emissions as well. And I've been working with my friend Denny Zane in Move LA down in Los Angeles, working on how can we get that legislation passed. He's been trying for a couple of years, working with CARB, and hopefully that will be also a big part. And then there's finally mode shift. Let's get out of our cars, go into walking and biking. So that's a big thrust of what I'd like to do as soon as I get into the Assembly.
Thank you kindly. And Mr. Mahmood, same question.
I think this is really critically important because climate change is the most existential threat that our country faces in our globe. And we have a moral responsibility, to your earlier question in the beginning, Joe, as San Franciscans and Californians, we're the 5th largest economy in the world, and we produce a commensurate amount of emissions. And we haven't had major climate legislation pass in almost 10 years since cap and trade was implemented, because I firmly believe we don't have the experience and the courage of politicians to actually get there. I've been endorsed and I've worked with the original author of the Green New Deal, former Chief of Staff to Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, to bring a customized Green New Deal to California. And we approach it from 2 steps. And it's modeled on the original New Deal from FDR, which is a climate commission modeled on the War Production Bureau, which gives the authority for the government to set production targets on how many affordable housing units, buses, electric vehicles, electric bikes that have to be produced in a set amount of time to meet our 1.5 degrees Celsius reduction targets. And it has the mandated authority to cut any red tape to meet those targets. That was a critical component of the War Production Bureau. The second is a climate public bank, which we will be able to issue green loans or zero interest loans of up to $100,000 to every individual or business to retrofit their house, their small business, their factory, or to purchase electric car, electric bike. That will reduce the barrier to entry for individuals to adopt the technology of today that we can actually, that's still too expensive. To deliver on such a plan, we do need new leadership. This is a big proposal. And we need people in science and technology and policy, like I've worked with across Stanford Medical School, to innovation and technology, to being a policy researcher in the Obama administration. That's the experience necessary to get this type of legislation passed. And because the stakes are way too high to rely on politics as usual and wait for another orange sky.
Fair enough, kindly. And David Campos.
Thank you, Joe, for that question. You know, it wasn't too long ago, just a few days ago, that we got the endorsement of the Sierra Club. And I think that the reason why the Sierra Club has endorsed this campaign is because they know that not only have I been talking about the climate crisis and issues around the environment, but I actually have been making those issues happen, making them a reality in San Francisco. When it comes to transportation, like I said, I'm the one who did the Free Muni for Youth that really changed the way youth look at transportation and did Clean Power Up. But what I'm asking for is a Green New Deal for the state of California. And I think that as the 5th largest economy in the world, we need to make our own investment in a recovery plan. You know, we have Build Back Better, I would call it Build Back Fair. Fair because we need to focus green new jobs away from polluting industries and focus developing those jobs in neighborhoods that have been disproportionately impacted by the environment. I'm talking about neighborhoods like the Bayview, like the Richmond in the Bay Area. We need California to make that investment away from fossil fuels. And I think the reason why there are so many interests that are, against this campaign is because they know that if we are in Sacramento, we are going to make this Green New a reality for California. That's what we need. And that will be one of the first things that I did if elected.
Well, thank you kindly. Let me follow up on this with a question here from the audience, which is kind of a piggybacking question on this, which is, let's specifically talk about non-use of automobiles. And Ms. Selby got to this a bit. What can we do to reduce, what can we do at an assembly level to reduce use of personal automobiles for transportation? And let's start with the Selby.
So at the assembly, we can start funding, and I mentioned the mind, and I think this is really important. I was working with the transit organization, the Voices for Public Transportation, talking to assembly members in just south of us. I'm not going to out them. And one of the things that he said was, now you know he's a man. One of the things that he said is, public transportation is for poor people, so we need it because it's for poor people. And I was flat out just flabbergasted, because the main thing we need to do, I think, in this world is change, even in San Francisco, change that idea of transportation is for poor people and cars are for people who can afford cars, into everybody should be able to shift over to public transportation. So at the assembly level, we can certainly do legislation that has to do with, better, I still won't ride a bicycle in San Francisco. So better bike lanes, safer bike lanes, electric bike lanes. I think bike share for free. I can't afford at this point to ride the e-bikes because they've really gone up, and a lot of people can't afford to ride them anymore. Focusing on little neighborhoods where you can walk. We've really learned how to do that with COVID, and we need to do that, I think, without COVID as well. And I may have to do a rebuttal on this one to think of more things, but thank you.
Oh, okay, but just remember, that's not what a rebuttal is.
Okay.
It's not an addendum; it's a rebuttal.
Oh, okay.
unless one of your fellow candidates, obliges you by saying something objectionable. But we'll see where that goes. Bilal Mahmood, what can we do at an assembly level to get people out of cars?
There's a lot we can do, and I think one of the strong positions I have in my platform is to ensure that over the next 1 to 2 decades, we move from a car-centric culture to a car-free culture that can be incentivized starting in San Francisco. I served on the board of the Eastern Neighborhood Democratic Club, and I saw how much communities like the Bayview suffer because of lack of access to public transit. Because there's no affordable grocery stores in the Bayview, they have to commute to other parts of the city. But because there's such a shuttered community service since the last couple of years, since the pandemic, they can't access the basic services and the components. That's why it's so critical to ensure that people have access to good public transit. So my policies will focus on funding, connectivity, and integration, on availability, bureaucracy, and red tape. So the first thing is actually boosting funding to muni and public transit. So I talked about the Climate Public Bank that we would institute as part of our larger Green New Deal. A lot of that funding would be able to go directly, funded by a carbon tax, go directly to muni and BART and e-bikes as credits so that people can actually shift to carbon neutral modalities. The second is implement efficient integration of our transit system. Assemblymember David Chu had an amazing bill called AB 629, which was going to ensure seamless transit across the entire Bay Area. So there's consistent fares between every different county and different region, but also have a single city administrator, on top that could ensure that we build better and in a more efficient manner for infrastructure development for more BART lines. And the third is actually invest in our high-speed rail. With CEQA reform and different regulations that are holding it back. These are the 3 components: cutting red tape, making it available, boosting funding, cutting bureaucracy. That's going to enable us to get the type of transportation we need and wean us off of fossil fuel, wean us off of cars.
Thank you for that answer. And also, just to note, there is a Foods Co. right next to the Bayview Police Department, and it's open till midnight. David Campos.
Thank you for that question. And, this is a very personal issue for me, because you have to understand that when we came to Los Angeles and we're living in South Central Los Angeles, the only way that my family could get around, because we were so poor, was through public transit, the RTD. And, based on that experience, I knew that coming to San Francisco, being on the Board of Supervisors, that I had to do everything possible to make public transit not only more reliable, but actually accessible. That's why we did Free Muni for Youth. And quite frankly, I think that we need to rethink how we look at public transit. Public transit should be regulated the way we regulate a utility. We should see it as something that requires greater investment on the part of government. And quite frankly, that requires that we demand more of the corporate entities that are actually benefiting from public transit. I do think that if we do right and we approach it the right way, that we could make public transportation free in San Francisco. That's, I think, doable, and quite frankly, free in California. And I say that because I'm the person who, when I said, let's do Free Muni for Youth, someone said, you're out of your mind. It will never happen. We made it happen. We can do that if we make the right investments and we have the right priorities. And that's where I think the experience that I have is important. I served on the Metropolitan Transportation Commission for 6 years, along with Scott Wiener, who we tried to actually expand public transit, make it more affordable, more transparent, and more seamless. I agree with Mr. Mahmood. We need to have more efficiency in how these agencies are run. 27 agencies in one region doesn't make a lot of sense.
Thank you kindly.
I do have a short rebuttal. It's
all right,
a rebuttal.
All right,
it's an honest rebuttal. And that is to Mr. Mahmood. Two things. One is CEQA is not the problem with high-speed rail. It's getting the appropriations out of the assembly. And two, I am very concerned about carbon taxes and about cap and trade in general, because that actually is, from an environmental justice perspective, it's really problematic, because you're just continuing to pollute in the very areas that are, that are most affected. So I just wanted to point out those two things.
Can I do a rebuttal to the rebuttal?
No, we've had that one before. If it's something that's worth bringing up, we can bring it up at the end. But let's move on to something that I think you all want to talk about, which is housing. And by the way, everybody, you are sending your questions, and I do appreciate it. Keep them coming. And also, when you formulate the questions, keep trying to think of something an assembly member would do. So my question is about housing from an assembly point of view. What should the assembly, what can and should the assembly do regarding increased housing production? And for individual candidates, I'd like to know how geographic equitability and local control factor into your worldview on this. And let's start with you, Mr. Mahmood.
So I think, firstly, the issue of housing, again, is deeply important to me and personal, because I come from a family of immigrants and refugees. 4 generations of my families had to move from a different continent, from Asia to Africa, back to Asia, and then to America. And it wasn't until we settled in the States that we had the stability to make it into the middle class. We had shelter, and housing was central to that journey. And so for that reason, housing is personal to me. And I believe if my parents came here today, they wouldn't be able to make it. If students, I talk to so many students and youth in our city today, and they are afraid when they leave San Francisco for college, they cannot come back and afford to live here. And I really believe it's due to fundamentally broken housing policy. And those who want, we have to support those who want to move here, but also those who already live here. And if you distill it down, it's really 2 things. Our cities block new housing development that drives up the price of rent due to lack of supply. And our cities don't do enough to uplift existing tenants to afford the exorbitant resulting rents. In the assembly, what we would do is ensure that we support both groups. Pass legislation that outright bans exclusionary zoning and allows us to build the housing at all heights and all levels of affordability, but also support other types of developments like social housing to ensure that all income levels can have more public housing availability for them. But also draft new legislation that would set new median times to build and reform our permitting infrastructure. But we also have to curtail the efforts that result in gentrification, support better renter protections, reform the Ellis Act to protect against evictions by landlords in the first 5 years they purchase a building. And essentially only then can we ensure that we have availability of housing at all levels of affordability. And only if we stop the obstructive micromanagement of our housing development like we see in our San Francisco Board of Supervisors, which is completely complicit in, and ensure that we can build anywhere at any height at any time.
All right. David Campos.
Thank you very much for that question. And let me say this, that I do believe that we need to increase the amount of housing that is built at all levels. But I won't agree with the last statement that developers should simply be allowed to build anything they want at any height at any time. I do think that if left to their own devices, and we have seen this, developers will build the kind of housing that is the most profitable to them, and that is luxury housing. And I'm not against the building of more luxury housing, but I do think that we need to build more housing that is affordable. And on the affordability piece, that's where I think the government has a role to play. And actually, of all the people that are running for this office, I actually have had a role in building more affordable housing than anyone. That was part of my job in Santa Clara County. We're actually set out a goal of building 4,500 units of supportive housing for people who are homeless. And the way that supportive housing was built in Santa Clara was with a public bond. We went to the voters to finance that, because we knew that the market was not going to do it on its own. And that's what I think is missing at the state level. The state of California needs to play a greater role in funding affordable housing, not just for low-income individuals, but for middle-income individuals, especially in places like San Francisco for first responders. 70% of our police officers, firefighters, they live outside of San Francisco. God forbid there's a natural disaster. How are they going to cross the bridge? That's what I bring, the ability to say, let's build more, but let's include in that building more affordable housing for all San Franciscans.
And Selmy.
Can you actually repeat the last part of the question about geographic equity, I think, and something else?
Yeah, and this is something where I'm sorry, I didn't quite hold you to it. I was scrambling here on my end, but I'm wondering, within your view of what the assembly should do, what can be done at the assembly level to lead to increased housing production? In addition to that, I'd like to know how geographic equitability and local control factor into your views.
Okay. I will do my best to answer both of those. Very quickly, in terms of funding, a wise man once said to me about a week ago, Peter Cohen, that you need two things for affordable housing. You need money and you need land. And so I believe the first thing we need to do is use the Bay Area Housing Authority to secure additional funding. That's absolutely the case. I think the state should be funding it. Another woman that I met yesterday who's been working on housing for the last 30 years told me that the feds used to pay for all affordable housing, because I asked her that exact question. Why do we not get affordable housing? She said the feds used to pay for everything and that they should get back in that business. I don't disagree with her. I also think that we should explore an estate transfer tax at the assembly level. There was one, but they watered it down from 200, it was $1 billion a year down to 200 million a year. Obviously, it's much easier to push something back up than to start from scratch. And as far as land is concerned, I'm very interested in looking at private educational institutions. Let's see, what is it called? It has art in its name, I believe, and incentivizing them to sell that land so that we can use it for housing. I think if we can get that particular organization out of the real estate game and out of the so-called educational game, that would be great. And as far as local control is concerned, which I don't think any of us really hit, it has been, I guess I don't have time for it, but I think we should ask that question because I think it's key.
Well, let's get to that. Let's focus on this completely, because I think the people in the Potrero Hill do want to know that, because many of the progressive measures that do encourage building more housing and building more affordable housing do tend to goose density in places that already had density. I'd like to know, is this working? Is it enough to increase density in places that already took the brunt of more development, such as Potrero Hill, such as Soma, such as the eastern quadrants of San Francisco? And I guess we'll start with Mr. Mahmood.
No, I think all municipalities and all regions need to take their fair share of housing as well. Certain regions should not bear the brunt of it, and I think that has to do with the exclusion exclusionary zoning practices that we have on the west side of the city. So at the state, we can override that and ban exclusionary zoning. And I think that the issue here is that there's literally not enough square footage in our city to support, there's like a 5 to 6 to 1 job ratio to people who are able to live and move here in terms of the number of houses that are available. And so if we expect San Francisco to be a beacon of hope for immigrants and migrants and refugees, as we are a sanctuary city, we have to have enough housing available, and that has to be put on the west side of the city. It was damning that the federal government didn't put a single Californian city as a sanctuary city for the Afghani refugees this last year, because they said the housing was too unaffordable. And so we're not going to be able to change the amount of land that we have in San Francisco, but we can change the height at which we can build and the places that we're allowed to build at certain heights. So I do think more parts of the city need to take their fair share and build housing and ban exclusionary zoning at all levels. And that has to be a responsibility of the state to push it if cities across the state are not taking that responsibility themselves.
All right. And what would they do? I mean, they can't put us in jail. So I mean, like, what would they do?
The state?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so what we can do is kind of like do different components of build upon SB 35. So SB 35 had good measures of ensuring that if cities and counties don't meet their targets of housing targets, it automates, it bans the ability to use discretionary review and environmental review processes to hold back housing developments that are done. Similarly, we can do similar things in terms of ensuring that if certain municipalities don't meet their housing targets, we'd go even further and maybe take away funding for building more roads to actually then do a double-edged incentive to reduce our infrastructure reliance on cars. So we take penalties and use both carrots and sticks to ensure that the cities and counties meet their housing targets, or they will face repercussions. That's kind of the things that the state can do to ensure that we get the housing targets that we need.
David Campos?
I have to respectfully disagree with that approach. I mean, look, I think we definitely need to build more, and we should definitely, by the way, build more in wealthy communities that have avoided building more housing. And I do think that we need to have more density, especially near transportation. But the idea that that is the same as saying, you know, a place like Potrero Hill should have no say on what is built in Potrero Hill, to me, I disagree with that. And to take that to say that the state can actually penalize Potrero Hill for speaking its mind, and we're going to take away funding of money that funds the roads, that doesn't make sense. Look, the reality is that we need to build more housing of all kinds. But when it comes to building the affordable housing that the person who works at a restaurant needs, that the state has to step in. And that's where I think leadership is needed at the state level. We need to have a housing bond for the entire state of California that actually allows jurisdictions like San Francisco to build affordable housing. And that's the thing, that it's not enough to protect tenants. If you do not build housing that is affordable for teachers, that is affordable for, you know, caretakers, for people who clean our homes, that means that you're not letting them live in San Francisco. And I think that they have a right to live in San Francisco. They are part of the fabric of San Francisco, and they're not going to be able to stay in San Francisco if you don't build housing for them.
Anthea Selby.
So I'll take a slightly different tack. I used to work with Hope SF, which is some of it is in Potrero Hill and close to Potrero Hill. And what they are doing is they're taking essentially barracks that were built in World War II, and they're making them multi-level income housing for, and not displacing. And they also have a principle of being resident first. And I think that that is something that we can all get behind, right? We can all get behind building affordable housing that maybe there is some higher and lower income in there, but mostly affordable housing. It doesn't hurt to build it in Potrero, I don't think. I think Potrero is better off. I did get a wonderful tour of Mission Bay. I think Mission Bay is better off by having that housing there. It's not towers, it's 5 to 8 stories. I also believe there are places on the west side that could also have the affordable housing. So yes, I believe we all can have more affordable housing, but I believe that if we should look at things like, you know, the Champs-Élysées, as they talk about, you know, 5 stories on Geary Boulevard, things like that, as opposed to necessarily looking at towers out by the beach. I don't know that that makes sense at all. So.
All right. Well, let's piggyback on a talk about building housing with people who are in housing. I would like you to assess your one of you's predecessor, David Chu, his record on tenants' rights and tenant bills, and what more needs to be done on the assembly level. What could you guys do to assist the tenants of California? And let's start with David Campos.
Thank you. You know, I do give David Chu credit. I think that he has been very supportive of tenants, but I do think that the challenges that tenants face have only been exacerbated by the pandemic. But you know, the more pressing issue, and this is something that I think that government needs to address, is, you know, what happens to the fact that you know, for during the pandemic, you had a lot of rent that has been due, that has been put on in abeyance, you know, and are we going to forgive that debt? And I think that we should. I think that given what we have gone through, that there should be an intervention on the part of the state government to forgive that debt and to find a way of compensating the property owners that are owed that debt. I also think that we need to do more to protect tenants from eviction, and especially, you know, what we're seeing right now with COVID and the new variant that is, you know, affecting so many communities. I think people are terrified, and I think that it's time to have an equitable recovery that recognizes that tenants have been disproportionately hit by this pandemic, and that it requires greater intervention and assistance on the part of the state government. And that's one of the first things that I will push for if I'm elected to the state assembly.
Thank you kindly. Bilal Mahmood.
I think it's important to recognize that one part of protecting tenants is hopefully electing tenants and renters to begin with. I think I'm the only one on the call as a candidate right now who is a renter, and maybe the 3rd renter elected into the state legislature. And having experience being a renter for my entire 7 years being in San Francisco, there's a couple things we need to do. One is Ellis Act reform. Currently, landlords, if you look at a majority of evictions, they happen when a landlord takes over a building, and they often evict them within the first 2 to 3 years of owning the building. That's what the data says. We need to ensure a reform of the Ellis Act that bans the evictions of individuals in the first 5 years that a landlord buys a building. The second is help increasing housing vouchers. So housing HUD vouchers is one of the most common ways that individuals who are resource poor are able to afford rent. Unfortunately, it's a federal program, so the state doesn't have control over it, but there is programs that can do like guaranteed income or universal basic income. From one of my foundations and nonprofits, we actually help support guaranteed income for undocumented workers during the pandemic, helping them to pay rent because they could not qualify for PPP loans. It was so helpful for them to actually make rent, and the benefit of guaranteed income and direct cash is it's not prejudicial. Landlords will often be prejudiced against people who use vouchers. And so using guaranteed income and direct cash, the landlord doesn't know where it comes from. And so if you give people direct cash to afford the rent that they have today, and we then ban landlords from able to evict them from their houses in the first 5 years that they own the building, that gives renters the protection they need to actually be uplifted and stay in their houses today.
And Thea Selby.
Thank you. So one of the things that I think we don't talk about a lot is that renters don't necessarily all want to be renters. I was a renter for 5 years and 6 years in the city, and I actually didn't think I'd ever be able to afford a house. It just ended up that because of my age, honestly, I feel like the longer you're here, you get sort of bonus points, and you're able to, you know, maybe afford your rent goes down, and you were able to afford a house. And that is no longer the case. I have actual children who are not able to be here because it's too expensive to rent. So I think one of the things we can really do is not only build affordable housing for rent, but we can also build affordable housing to buy, because I really think there are a lot of people who are renters now, who not only are terrified of eviction, and we need to absolutely make sure that they're not evicted, but they're also not necessarily interested in being renters, especially if you come from a disadvantaged background and you've never had the ability to have that wealth, ability to build that wealth. This is a way that you can build it. And I think we should talk more about that in the city. I think there's a lot of pent up demand probably from especially people who are disadvantaged and who don't have a lot of money. How can we get them to be able to build their wealth by being able to buy into a little condo, which the person who gave me the tour in Mission Bay actually was able to do, and it worked out very well for her.
On that one. Let me ask you a very specific one here, which is David Campos, at the onset of this forum, you mentioned SB 9, which allows for subdividing home lots and building multiplex homes, and you said you support it. And I would like to ask all the candidates if they support this particular bill, which is going through right now, and their reasons for supporting it and what it could do, and how tangible an effect it would have on San Francisco.
Well, I do support SB 9. I think that the idea of subdividing and creating more housing as a result of that is something that makes a great deal of sense. And I think that, some of the folks that are behind these efforts to expedite housing at the state level, like Tony Atkins, the president pro tem, have supported, are endorsing me, because they understand my commitment to that. One thing that I would add to that piece of legislation is perhaps consider incentivizing affordability. Again, in this debate of promoting more housing production, the issue of affordability seems to be missing at the state level, and I think that that's an important piece for consideration for a place like San Francisco. I certainly would promote more efforts along the lines of SB 9 and SB 10 that also allow for more density. But again, I think that unless you find the resources to fund affordable housing, it's sort of pie in the sky. You basically say, yeah, we want to build more affordable housing, but unless you actually identify the source of funding to pay for it, you're not going to see it. And that's why I think this election is so critical for San Francisco. The 17th Assembly District needs a champion for affordable housing, someone who's going to go there and roll up their sleeves to identify how we're going to pay for it. Because unless you identify how you pay for it, it's just words.
And Thea Selby?
Could you repeat the question?
I would like to know your position on SB 9 and why you've come to that position. And that's the one about dividing a home lot and building multiplexes.
Yeah. So that was a very easy one for me. I'm a transit advocate, and if you're looking at corner lots and they're close to transit, then the more people you have, the more density you have, the more possibility you have of getting more people on the bus. The more people you have on the bus, the better it is for everybody. The more buses you have, so it all ends up in a good direction. And so I'd like to get away, and I just came to this the other day, from talking about them as single family and multifamily, because much as I support working families, and I really do, a lot of us in San Francisco are not that, we're roommates. We're all roommates, and so it's something I think that we should think about a little bit. I work in words, so it's something that's occurred to me that we always talk about single family as if there's this little like mom and pop and two kids and they're all moving in, but really what it often is a bunch of roommates, who are moving in together and trying to figure out how to do that. So I guess one of my things that I'd like to think about when we're dealing with things like people households is, how do we build these in a way that is both affordable, absolutely, because nobody can afford right now to rent in San Francisco, but also how can we build these for the people who live in San Francisco, who may or may not be families. They may be a variety of different kinds of relationships. Yes, I'm all for it.
And Mr. Mahmood?
I'm fully for SB 9, SB 10, and SB 35 before that, and SB 50. I believe I'm the only candidate in this race who has endorsed those from the very beginning and supported them. And I think the reason it's important is, again, it goes back to, do you believe that exclusionary zoning is fundamentally bad, or do you not? And I think SB9 and SB10 were great, showing momentum that we actually are moving in the right direction towards this policy. And I would expand on it. I pledge to bring back SB50 in our first year in office. And that's something we will do when we're elected. And I think this is critically important because if this is, again, one of the roles the state can play is when local control is obstructing the ability to actually build housing at the certain heights and in certain kind of quantities like the student fourplexes, it is the role of the state to kind of step in and ensure that we meet the housing targets that we need and make it permissible to do so.
Well, thank you kindly on that one.
Can I do a rebuttal?
Yeah, if it's a rebuttal.
Okay, it is a rebuttal, and it's something I've learned recently about exclusionary zoning, and that is that there's a balancing act between exclusionary zoning and actually making sure that the people who live there now, and I go back to Hope SF again about the resident-centric way of looking at things, especially with low-income people. Sometimes when you talk about sort of the market and exclusionary zone in the market taking over, what ends up happening is the very people you're trying to help are the ones who actually get injured because they're not part of the discussion. So I think that all works very well if you make sure that you're resident centric and you're making sure that you keep the disadvantaged people who you're trying to help in the center of the discussion.
Let me move it from zoning from housing to zoning for something else. I'm talking to you here from the Excelsior, where there is a marijuana dispensary all along the mission there, one after the other. And we had the only in San Francisco situation a few years back of the marijuana dispensary complaining about the illegal gambling den just down the way because it was bringing in the wrong element. We as Californians have voted in legalized marijuana.
Didn't they shut it down?
Oh yeah, yeah.
They shut down the gambling. Yeah.
Captain McFadden said he'd do it if it was the last thing he did, and he's still doing things, and they shut it down. I'm wondering here, as we have legalized marijuana, we as California voters have legalized marijuana, San Francisco is moving forward with this. How are things working? You know, from a statewide perspective, how are things working and how are they not working? And how can we move forward in a way that respects the wishes and capacities of individual neighborhoods? And let's start with David Campos.
Thank you very much, Joe. And let me say this, that as a gay man, cannabis actually has had a sort of a unique role in the life of our community because the cannabis, cannabis was a way of keeping so many people alive and improving their quality of life during the AIDS crisis, and the move to legalize cannabis, in many respects had so many folks in the LGBTQ community leading that way. And so I do think that cannabis is here to stay, and that there is a way for us to embrace its presence. I do think that there has to be some input from local communities as requests come in. I do want to focus on the issue of equity, though, because one of the things that I would like to see is more access to this industry to women and to people of color. And when it comes to people of color, let's be honest about the fact that people of color, Black and brown people in particular, were disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs, and cannabis being an important part of that. And yet very few of them are actually benefiting from this new industry. I think it's only fair that we level the playing field and provide more access to women, more access to people of color to this industry. And I think that that's a way of providing more opportunity in those communities.
Okay. Hey, Selby?
Thank you. So I was on the cannabis task force for San Francisco and helped to craft the policies that we then sent to the Board of Supervisors to consider. And there are a lot of ways it's working. One way it's working, and I learned this when I went to before I went to the Brownie Mary Democratic Club. I looked up, how are we doing? Well, we've doubled our sales during COVID of cannabis. So go us. And by us, I mean California. I'm not talking about San Francisco per se. So, you know, that's a good thing. We want legal, and because if it's legal, then things like fentanyl don't end up in it. I myself, as a youngster at a Peter Frampton concert, smoked something which was definitely not just marijuana. We don't want to do that, right? So we want it to be legal. What's working?
Did you come alive?
What's that?
Did you come alive?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So what's not working and working are the taxes. Okay, from the if you talk to the cannabis people, they will tell you the taxes are absolutely continuing the thriving illegal trade, and there is a thriving illegal trade. And these folks who have the illegal marijuana have AK-47s, and they're in our national parks. So this is not good. We do not want that. So this is something I think of a balancing good and not good. And then I agree about the women for sure. The women-owned and the Black and Brown-owned cannabis dispensaries. We need to be equitable about that, and very few women are making out like bandits in this.
And Bilal Mahmood.
I think firstly, as Dave Campos mentioned this a little bit, we need to right the wrongs of the history of marijuana convictions that we had. There's still over 100,000 individuals who have marijuana convictions on their record despite marijuana being legal. That's because we require individuals to apply for expungement. It's pretty regressive. And so one of the first things we would do is ensure that we eliminate the requirement. So within the first year of office, we'll pass a law that ensures that by January 31st, 2023, every person with a marijuana conviction is automatically expunged from their record, predominantly affecting people of color. And so it ensures that they will be immediately uplifted to have access to basic services, not penalized by the legal system, not penalized by housing and job and are prejudiced against them. The second is, I think, the things to help the actual dispensaries is the same things that actually help all small businesses and are hurting them in San Francisco. I worked in the Office of Innovation Entrepreneurship in President Obama's administration, which was combined with the Small Business Administration. So we saw this firsthand. But we see this a lot in San Francisco is how do we make it easier to start a business? There's too many permits. There's too many fees. It's too hard. It takes $200,000 to set up an ice cream shop. How much do you think it takes to set up a marijuana dispensary? And so,
okay. I mean, it depends if there's another marijuana dispensary, it's going to DR you, right?
Exactly. So eliminating this kind of obstructive control that one store can protest another store, we need to really reform these things. It's more of a city thing, but the state ensuring that we have better micro lending services, better permits and funding to be able to start the businesses are some of the things we should need to focus on that would help cannabis businesses as well.
All right, well, thank you for that one. I'd like to take a general question here, which is just, I'd like to know with each candidate here, what distinguishes you from your fellow candidates? And not just, you know, as a personal distinguishing feature, how will that make you a better assembly member? And let's start with you, Thea Selby.
Yeah, so obviously the big distinguishing feature is that I'm a woman and that I am a parent. And how that makes a difference, because I've certainly been asked that question, well, what does it matter? When, you know, you're a woman, who cares? 70% of the assembly is male, and 30% is female. And when you have that kind of inequity, when you have that kind of, you know, focus from one gender and not having both genders or multiple genders, let's be San Francisco about this, then you don't have all points of view. I have raised my children in the city. I have walked them to public schools. I have dealt with the medical establishment. I have, you know, tried to get them into the camps when you can't get them into the camps because there's not enough camps, school, you know, summer camps and too many kids. I have dealt with all of these things. And as a woman, you know, there are little like, you know, tampons were taxed, for example. I'm not sure a man would think about that. You know, whether diapers should be part of SNAP, whether diapers should be part of, you know, something that you're able to pay for with government money. I'm not sure, you know, I know who passed those things and they were women. So I think it does make a difference that you have all points of view. I'm not saying that I'm better. I'm just saying that we have 70% of our assembly members are male. And I think it would be great for the first time in 20 years to have a woman.
Thank you kindly. And moving on to David Campos.
Thank you very much for that. And I'm going to talk about two things. And the first thing that I want to talk about is my personal story. I do think that my personal story is important. It really defines who I am. And a lot of you know about my history, coming here as an undocumented kid, as a dreamer before the concept even existed. And I lived as an outsider, as an undocumented person for many years, and I know what it's like to fear deportation. I know what it's like to see your parents struggle to put food on the table and perhaps not eat a meal because they can't put food, buy enough food for their kids. I think that perspective is badly needed in Sacramento. But it's not just that I bring that, I bring the other thing, which is my experience. I have dedicated my life to public service, to making the lives of people like me and my parents and so many people that are struggling better. And it's not just talk, it's actual action. And that's why I think so many people are supporting this campaign, because they know that I not only talk the talk, but I actually walk the walk. And I think that it is time that we have someone in Sacramento that is unafraid to take on the big issues facing this society. And inequality is at its core what's impacting. It's impacting so many parts of our society. And that's why we're running a corporate-free campaign, because we believe that to be able to tackle those big issues, that you have to be unafraid to upset the people, to fund the political system. That's what I think makes me unique, and that's why I hope you will consider supporting me.
And Bilal Mahmood.
Yeah, I think this race is critical because the stakes are really high in terms of the challenges that we face. And we need two types of leadership that actually has the experience to get there. We look at the challenges we face, it's climate change, it's healthcare, it's still pandemics, housing. These are science and technology and policy problems. I'm the only one in this race who has experience across all three of those sectors. I was a neuroscientist at Stanford Medical School. I was then worked in the Obama administration, national policy, and the Small Business Administration, combined with the Office of Innovation Entrepreneurship. And I've worked in the private sector, both in nonprofits and in for-profit companies that help to bring innovative technology and democratize it to thousands of small businesses so they got access to free technology that Amazon had. And so we can only solve things like climate change and pandemics and healthcare and housing if we merge science and technology and policy together. And secondly, I am not beholden to any special interests. I'm not a career politician. I'm not doing this to chase ladders or move on to the next highest office. I'm doing this because the stakes are way too high right now and the challenges that we face are way too important. We've had elected leaders in office for decades, and the stakes of our city have only gotten worse. Housing inequality is worse. Opioid epidemic is worse. Income inequality is worse. Cost of rent is worse. All of these things have gotten worse under the tenure of elected officials. And we need new leadership that understands and can bridge the consensus of science, and technology, and policy to address the insurmountable odds that we face and the changes ahead.
Let's move from who you are and your priorities to what you would spend money on, because it looks like we're going to have a big surplus in the state budget. And I was wondering, A, what would you think are the priorities that we should be spending money on? And B, how would you go about convincing your fellow assembly members to share your views? And let's start with Deha Selby.
Yeah, so, one of the reasons I'm in this race is that I've seen through the pandemic how especially our disadvantaged people in the city have suffered with COVID, and they've suffered with, in the educational system. And we need to and they've left. They've absolutely left. They've left the educational system. They've left at the K through 12, where I don't know if you're aware that, that seniors are basically graduating with D's and F's, and they're sort of being pushed along because life was so hard last year that they're being given a pass, and I don't blame them. But we're at the community college level, we've lost a lot of women, and we've lost, because they're taking care of kids and they're taking care of their parents during COVID, and we've lost almost all of our students are Black and brown. So if we've lost students, we've lost Black and brown students. So what I want to do at the, aside from the climate stuff, is education. I am an expert in the public education system. I know we've been screwed since Prop 13. I want to make sure that Prop 15, which came a couple of years ago, and I'm pretty sure San Francisco passed it, which allowed for the split roll and the increase of the commercial property tax to fund 40% of which was to go to education. We need that kind of thinking. We need that kind of championing at the state level. And that is one thing that I am very excited about moving forward and getting our accountability in our educational system, and also the funding that we so badly lack.
And Bilal Mahmood.
I think budget surplus is not a source of ongoing funding, so I think we should apply it immediately to the crises and the epidemics that we have in hand. But what are our current crises? It's still a pandemic. It's a school crisis. It's a housing crisis, and a house crisis, and a climate crisis. Those are some of the most impending crises that we have. So we should apply the funding to that. For schools, one of the biggest issues is affecting the pandemic response system. There are other cities and countries across the world that are able to tackle pandemics and epidemics outbreaks as they happen and not have to shut down the city. There's a 717 system that detects outbreaks in 7 days, identifies the cause in 1, and then controls it within 7. We need to bring that system to San Francisco and California to ensure that as future epidemics happen and outbreaks happen, we can control them as fast as possible and not have to shut down our economy. The second is shelter beds. There's only 2,000 to 3,000 shelter beds and 8,000 to 10,000 unhoused individuals. There's simply not enough beds in the immediate short term to house the individuals while we still wait for permanent affordable housing, which we need to invest in as well. So we would boost funding immediately for shelter beds in cities like San Francisco and Los Angeles that have housing and unhoused crisis to ensure that we have the much needed shelter beds to get people off the streets. And the last is our climate crisis. We are reaching a ticking time bomb of 5 to 8 years. We need to seed funding into now. So boost funding for electric bus infrastructure and for rapid bus transit across the city and the state to ensure that we can continue to invest and increase municipalities' less reliance on cars and more on public transit to meet our climate goals.
And David Campos.
I do think that we can do a lot with that, depending on who you ask, 70 plus, 30 plus $1 billion surplus. And quite frankly, the first thing that I would do is that I would introduce a bill to end hunger in California. The fact is that to this day, in 2022, there are kids and seniors that are going to bed hungry in California, and we can end that by simply providing food. And that's something that surplus can be used to address. The second thing that I would do is that I think we need to address the lack of adequate and equitable access to healthcare. And that's why Medicare for all has to be a top priority. And that's why I think it's so critical that we push that really quickly. You know, for the Latino community, Latinos are 8 times more likely to die from COVID if your age is 22 to 55. We need to address those inequities. We do need to fund the Green New Deal. And I do think that Thea Selby is absolutely right, that education is the key to addressing the inequities in our society. It's the great equalizer. I'm proud to have the support of our teachers, proud to have the support of our faculty in City College. We do need to fund our public education system, K through 12. It's shameful that California is in the bottom 10 among the states in per pupil funding. We need to be in the top 10. We need to make college education affordable, including, I think, making community college free for all Californians who want it. That's the kind of move that I would make, and I think that the time to act is now.
Thank you kindly. And with that, I think we can move to the lightning round. Mr. Haney not being here today meant that we were able to get through more questions and many of yours. And I appreciate everybody sending in some very good questions, as well as some interesting ones. So I think all the candidates probably are familiar with the concept of a lightning round. I'm going to ask you the question, and it's yes or no. You have to answer yes or no. There's really no prevaricating. Part of this is being able to answer yes or no. So this won't take very long. I will start, and I've been jumping around with the order of the candidates, but I think just to get this down like a drum beat, we'll just go with first Campos, then Mahmood, and then Selby each time. So question number 1, I supported SB 35 when it was proposed. David Campos. You did? Okay. You just say yes. I can't see.
Your sign's too big.
The sign is too big. Yes. Yeah, so I'm glad you guys have props, but hold up the prop and say yes. So I'll do it again. I supported SB 35 when it was proposed. David Campos.
Yes.
Bilal Mahmood
Yes.
and Thea Selby.
Yes.
And it's Thea,
I
I'm
almost said
sorry.
C. It's
Yeah.
Thea, yeah.
Yeah, I'm
So-
sorry. I have Irish friends that pronounce it differently. I apologize. Number 2, SB 35 has been a good thing for California. David Campos.
Yes.
Bilal Mahmood.
Yes.
Thea
Yes.
Selby. Question number 3. I support the recall of Chesa Boudin. David Campos.
No.
Bilal Mahmood.
No position.
This is a yes or no.
It's no position.
All right. And Thea Selby.
No.
I support the recall of the Board of Education members. David Campos.
Yes on 1, but no on 2.
I understand. Bilal Mahmood
I support the recall of all 3. Yes.
and Thea Selby.
Yes. Wholeheartedly.
All right. I support the process. I support reforming the process of enacting recalls. David Campos.
Yes.
Bilal Mahmood
Yes.
and Thea Selby.
No.
Okay. And number 6, congestion pricing in San Francisco would require state approval. With that said, yes or no, I support congestion pricing here in San Francisco. David Campos
Yes.
and Bilal Mahmood
Yes.
and Thea Selby.
Yes.
Question number 7, Caltrans should make more properties under freeways available for homeless shelters and housing. David Campos.
Yes.
Bilal Mahmood,
Yes.
Thea Selby.
Yes.
Question number 8, Potrero Hill is slated to be the site of a 450 micro-unit, 120-foot tall tower. Yes or no, this is fair and good for the residents of Potrero Hill. David Campos.
Not sure yet. No position yet.
All right. Bilal Mahmood
Yes.
and Thea Selby.
David, were you able to do a neutral?
I said a no position yet. I haven't talked to many folks in Potrero Hill yet.
Yeah, I sort of feel the same way. It depends on the project, really. I mean, so, yeah.
We'll get back to you on that one then. Number 9, I would, if offered, accept an endorsement and monetary support from the Police Officers Association. David Campos.
No.
Bilal Mahmood
Will not accept it. No.
and Thea Selby.
No.
And yes or no, I represent a change from the dominant political forces running San Francisco for the last 25 years. David Campos.
For sure, yes.
All right. Bilal Mahmood
Yes.
and Thea Selby.
Absolutely.
Last question. If a congressional seat opens up during my first term, I would consider running for it. David Campos.
No.
Bilal Mahmood.
Nope.
Thea Selby.
No. No interest.
And those are my questions. And with that, I will go to your 2-minute closing statements, and then the candidates will be voted upon by the club members. So let's start with you, Thea Selby.
Thank you so much. So again, my name is Thea Selby. I love Potrero Hill. It's a beautiful place. Dogpatch is also beautiful. Mission Bay is also beautiful. I'm running because I want to make sure that we have a voice for working families in San Francisco. I want to make sure that we use education as our ladder of opportunity for everyone, and that we work really hard to meet or exceed those climate goals through our housing legislation that we're going to need to do, through our transit, which I've been an expert on for the last 10 years. At City College, I was able to do things like get a $400,000 out of our developers from Balboa Reservoir for the students so that they could get free RAMS passes and do a campaign on that. I was also able to get 3,000 units between Balboa Reservoir and 33 Goff negotiated, not built yet, but negotiated. And I am super excited about going to Sacramento for you with my dog to represent San Francisco, all of San Francisco. I am unbeholden to pretty much anyone except the people of San Francisco. If that means something to you, please vote for me. If you're interested in somebody who has a strong education, transportation, green background, please vote for me. If you want to see a woman for the first time in 20 years at the State Assembly, please vote for me today. Thank you.
Thank you kindly. There's a benefit to going first. There's a benefit to going last. Going in the middle is less desirable. So I will flip a coin. Bilal Mahmood, choose heads or tails.
Heads.
I am sorry, sir, it is tails. So you go.
I go? Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone for letting me be here, and thanks Joel for moderating as well. And I do think, as many have said, this is one of the most critical elections that we will face as a city, because we all want to live in an apartment we can afford to rent, afford to have transit that gets us to school or work on time, and we have restaurants and small businesses that can thrive and grow and we can enjoy. And that dream of being able to have a cosmopolitan city is the one that we love. We want to dream of social mobility and breaking into the middle class for ourselves and for our children and their children. But the last decade has fundamentally limited that dream, and we see it all around us. Housing costs are up, small business closures are up, people are leaving our cities, and things have gotten exponentially worse during the pandemic. But it was getting worse before that, and it will get even more worse as we go into the years ahead. We've talked about climate a bit, and it's because we have 5 to 8 years left to hound this point in before climate change takes effect. And as a result, inequality, healthcare, we have to think radically different about these solutions in the decade ahead, because politics as usual has not solved it and will not solve it. And the thing about these epidemics is that they don't care whether someone is nice or good looking, has the most, tells you the nicest things, or what you want to hear. These things are issues that will only be solved by outcomes and not words, that we solve if we take outside bets on radical change with radical candidates produce radical outcomes. And we need to realize that change. Someone who will stand up against special interests, who's not beholden to them, actually build bridges between government and industry, and sacrifice, or willing to sacrifice, political capital to get the results we need in the last decade we maybe have left. So ask yourself, if electeds haven't solved these issues for 10 years, how are they going to solve it in Sacramento in the next 10 years? And I really do think this is our time to seize change. We can have new blood with experience in science and technology and policy, someone who's supported innovative and new solutions from small business relief to guaranteed income. And despite being a first-time candidate, we've raised hundreds of thousands of dollars in this race, completely corporate free, no fossil fuel money, no law enforcement money, no money from other politicians. Over 80% from the Bay Area. We've been endorsed by some of the largest Democratic clubs, Eastern Neighbor Democratic Club, the Women's Political Committee, Chinese American Democratic Club, and polling is showing us shifting by double digits. And so these intersections represent that it is our time. It will take us, immigrants, scientists, technologists, policy wonks working together, and think that only together can we win this, and really looking forward to your support.
Thank you kindly. And David Campos.
Thank you very much, Mr. Eskenazi, President Barnes, and to all of Potrero Hill neighborhood. This is a very special neighborhood, and I do think that Potrero Hill will decide who the next assembly person is. So thank you for this opportunity. Many of you know my story. You know that I came here as a dreamer, crossing the border with my sister on my back. I know what it's like to be hungry. I know what it's like to face eviction. I know what it's like to live as an outsider in society, to be targeted because of the color of my skin, because of the language that I speak, or the person that I love. I know what it's like to suffer. I know what it's like to actually cross a jungle, then a desert, then an armed border, to come here to this country in search of the American dream. And my family and I came here in search of a dream. We came here in search of a society where everyone was free, where people were fed, where everyone was safe, where people, every person mattered. I still believe in that dream that brought me and my family here, but we're not there where we need to be in terms of achieving that dream. But I know that we have the ability to get there. And we get closer to that dream with every middle-class job that we create, with every unit of affordable housing that we create, with every homeless person that we feed and house, we get closer to that dream. We need the time to make this dream a reality for all San Franciscans is now. And when we elect our leaders, not the corporations, we get closer to that dream. We want a California that works for all of us. And that's what this campaign is about. It's about making the American dream, the California dream, the San Francisco dream a reality for all of us. I am running a corporate-free campaign that is for the people of the city and county in San Francisco, a campaign that is for you. And with you, I know that nothing can stop us. No corporation, no powerful interest can stop us. Join us if you believe in this American dream, in this California dream, in this San Francisco dream. Visit compostforus.com. Thank you again, and wishing everyone a very happy new year.
Well, thank you kindly to all of the candidates, and thank you kindly to all of the sponsors and everyone who stuck it out and watched the forum. The voting members, you have 15 minutes. If you have any trouble, please message Bill Barnes or Jody Eisen. And Joni, sorry, I misread that. Please send your ballot to, I just got another one of these here. Sorry, please send your ballot to contact_us at phdc.org. That's contact_us at, there was an erroneous email address, contact_us at phdemclub.org. Thank you kindly to everyone, and Bill Barnes will close the show.
Just to thank you to all the candidates who are running, and we're really thankful for those of you who took the time to speak to residents in our neighborhood. There are 73 folks still with us at 817. So thank you everyone who stuck it out to hear from these folks. We'll be lucky, no matter who wins this race, to have a great representative in Sacramento, and just thankful for you for being here. Just a couple of housekeeping items. Please get your ballots in by 8:30, and ballots will be received in your mailbox, so you can start voting on just a few weeks away, January 15th, for the February 15th election. So please keep your eye out. It's an odd time, and let your neighbors know to return their ballots, postage paid, back to the elections department so your vote can be counted. We'll close for this evening, but please feel free to be in touch with all we're doing. And thank you again, everyone. And